set review. We're back once again. Marc back with us. How's it going, Marc? Welcome. So if this is your first time joining us, what we do here is we split this into two parts. Day one, we're going to do commons and uncommons. That's today. Also archetypes. So we're going to be starting with the golden commons, talking a little bit about what we think each archetype is doing. Maybe, fill in some gaps of like, this card, kind of weird. Where does it go? It goes in this archetype. That's what it's doing here. So just get you set up, situated with the set. Then we go through color by color, talking about all the cards. We have pre-graded the cards, makes things just flow a little bit smoother. So there's not going to be a lot of hemming and hawing. We're just going to go in, be like, hey, here's the card. We're going to read it out, talk about it, talk about a grade, talk about any discrepancies me or Marc might have between our ratings of the card. And for those necessary, when there's ones that are kind of interesting, we'll give it a little more discussion than that. But other than that, I think we're pretty good to go. This is like a pretty straightforward set. There is a bonus sheet, but we're not going to cover that because it's like a very uncommon bonus sheet. I think it's 1 in every 8 packs. We're not planning to cover that throughout the set review. There's not any double face cards or anything like that. So yeah, I think we're just ready to jump in. Okay, so we're going to start with blue-white. So as I mentioned a minute ago, we're just going to talk about the archetypes first, going through all the color pairs. And as we do this, we're going to grade the signpost uncommon, the gold card. Signpost, of course, being the thing that shows you what the archetype is doing. And we're just going to start with blue-white here. We're just going to kind of in Wooburg order. Station Monitor is our first one. So Station Monitor is a blue-white 2/2, uncommon. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you make a 1/1 colorless drone artifact creature token with flying, and has this token can only block creatures with flying. So blue-white is doing a double spell thing. I will say, my first kind of overview thought on the set, the themes are lighter here than they are in some other sets. Like blue-white double spell, that's a light theme. It's not like your entire deck is going to be based around it. It's just kind of a thing that happens once in a while. There are some decks that you're leaning a little more into synergies than others, but this isn't, I'm trying to think of an example of a recent set, but, Duskmourn might be a good example where it's like you're doing the thing when you're in the red-green Delirium deck. I think the themes are slightly lighter here. But Marc, I'll send it to you. Any thoughts on blue-white, or if you have any thoughts on what I was just talking about with the archetypes?
Yeah, so I guess first I'll just cover for those who are joining this kind of set review for the first time, just to explain what these visuals are, because it's probably worth doing a bit of a disclaimer here. So I do these all beforehand. I don't spend a ton of time on them, but I basically make a shell for what I think all the archetypes are roughly going to look like. The top part being kind of the base of what that signpost uncommon is getting you to do. The bottom part being the supplementary cards that maybe are fill in or maybe I'm not sure about, might be like 23rd card types of things. And then off to the right and sometimes out of your screen for some of these will be the maybe rewards for uncommons and rares that no one else wants to pick up that you might fall happily into your lap later than usual. So these, obviously some of you are looking at the set for the first time. You may be saying, okay, I don't know what all these cards I'm looking at are. We still decide to do this at the start. It's a nice way to set the tone, talk about the archetypes, show a little bit about how the signposts fit into each shell. Feel free to jump back to these later, or even do this at the end if you prefer to do this kind of visual piece after learning what all the commons do. But it is just a nice visual to have in the background while we discuss each of these archetypes.
Yep, absolutely. And for those who would like the total deep dive, I'm going to be posting the links to all these Archetype Skeletons in the description. Also going to post our 17 lands tier list, so anybody who wants just a little bit of a quick look in on those, if you want to hone in on a specific card, feel free to do that. And yeah, I'm really glad Marc called that out. This overview here of each archetype, it's not meant to be like you have to know every single card right now. You can come back to it. It's also just kind of a background for us to, pick out a card or two you might want to talk about. Mostly we're just talking broadly here. So yeah, blue-whites. Any preliminary thoughts on blue-white?
Yeah, I mean, a lot to say because we're going through the first one and kind of explaining everything here, but we'll spend a little while with this. You said this doesn't really have the same impact for archetypes as Duskmourn, but I would actually even go back to Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
And Final Fantasy, the set we just came off of, one of the things I noticed when doing those archetypes was that the signposts were more supported than I expected. Like when I was doing the blue-red shell, I was like, oh, there's actually a lot of, and we even called this out in the set review, there was a lot of ways to spend 4 mana all throughout your curve in blue-red, and lo and behold, it ended up being a great deck. And then the green-black graveyard deck, it was supported, and the red-black wizards, it was all supported. This set's quite different, both because there's only one signpost uncommon for each color pair,
Yeah.
but also the uncommons, as you kind of said, they're not really pushing towards a specific theme. So I think what they're going for with this set is kind of like a slower vibe, make things more about spending a lot of mana, doing some big splashy effects. And what I noticed while doing these shells actually might be slightly less useful than they were in Final Fantasy, because every set of commons is basically just a pile of removal spells.
Mm-hmm.
So every single color, blue only has 2, but every other color has 3 removal spells, all of which I would say are between playable to actively good. So there's a ton of removal. What that tells me is they don't want the board snowballing too quickly. They don't want things to get too far out of hand and for you not to be able to see the late game. And I do expect that maybe not so much battle cruiser magic, but this might be more like an old set where the king is card advantage and removal spells.
Right. Yes. They even said, just to give some credence to what you just said there, in one of the preview streams, one of the designers, I think maybe it was Andrew Brown, said, yes, they kind of intended this set to be a little bit slower, a little bit more about going over the top. So, we'll see how that pans out. Sometimes designers' intentions don't always come to fruition, but I'm going in kind of seeing a lot of the cards that we have today in that lens. So with this card, I'm just going to dial us back to Station Monitor. Again, it's been a while. It's a 2-mana blue-white 2/2. When you double spell, you make a 1/1 flyer token that cannot block. Artifact token, too. That matters. So there's a lot going on here mechanically as far as what the actual mechanics in the set kind of point towards. So one of the things in this set, if you haven't seen anything, I'll kind of bring up a warp card here. And probably a good time to just talk about warp. So warp is sort of a evoke/adventure-esque mechanic. Mechanizoa here as an example. 4 blue for a 5/5 artifact creature. Comes in, taps something down, or put a sun counter on it, taps it down. But you can warp it for 3 mana, which means you put it on the battlefield, but then you exile it end of turn, goes to the exile zone, and you can cast it later. Right? So it's kind of like, okay, this 6-drop, it's in my hand, stuck in my hand. You don't want a 6-drop in your opening hand, but maybe you don't have a turn 3 play. You cast it for its warp mode, tap something down, doesn't untap, cast it as its big version later. Right? So one of the things with your warp spells is they are cheaper, generally, or the warp cost is cheaper across the board. So with blue-white, you're going to have the opportunity to double spell a little more often because you have these expensive cards that have a cheap mode. Another thing that's really good for helping you continue to double spell, because this is a theme we've seen in the past in a few sets, cards that help you draw other cards. So just like a cantrip, 1 mana, draw a card kind of effects. Those help you double spell. Basically cheap cards and card draw. That's what you're looking for when you're trying to enable double spelling.
Yeah, and with that in mind, so the blue-white shell here is kind of light. Like there's not a lot of cards in this upper left, 1 to 5 mana column. And so that already tells me like they're not really pushing list. There's no 1 mana cantrip in either white or blue that's really going to support this. Interested to see how these archetypes are going to play out. I do think this might be even more play boostery than usual, where the uncommons really are king.
I agree.
Station Monitor itself, though, just to get back to the grade, because that's the card we're actually talking about right now. I gave it a B-. You gave Station Monitor a B+. So I saw this just a little, B+ to me is more like Gremlin Tamer, where you can sometimes trigger it, multiple times per turn and pretty much every turn. This one, you're only going to get it once per turn cycle, unless you're really somehow doing it twice on your turn and twice on your opponent's turn. And the fact that they can't block just had me a little bit lower on Station Monitor, but still think it's a good card.
Yeah, totally fair. And one note on this card is I would say if you can, don't run it out as your 2-drop. Like if you have another 2-drop, play a different 2-drop, save this till turn 4 so you can double spell with it on that turn, get your guaranteed value. And yeah, just one thing before we get into the other archetypes here. I really agree with your thought on the uncommons in the set, like being a little more play boostery than normal, which means basically it's going to be about the uncommons. Something you said in my Discord, I saw you say this earlier today or yesterday, was the commons are weird, right? Like the commons in this set are kind of like just removal, like the good ones are the removal spells, and then the rest of them kind of quite fillery actually. So we'll see. Maybe that we change our tune on that as we go on. But yeah, that was something I noticed as well. Okay,
Yeah, and
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, chat just points out there is actually a 1 mana cantrip in Mental Modulation,
This is
the
true.
top thing that does double spell. But notably, the other thing about blue white is there's barely also any other cards that reward you for double spelling. So
Mm-hmm.
like not only is it less supported in the cards that are supposed to work with it, but there's also less of a reward for doing it than what a lot of the signposts tell you to do. So yeah, super interested in seeing where this is going to go.
Totally. Okay, with all that out of the way, our next ones will go a little bit quicker here. So we're gonna move on to blue black now. The signpost in common is Elthariel, Dreaming Alkalite. This is a 3 mana, 1 blue black, 2/3 legendary creature. When it enters, you draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard an artifact card. And during your turn, this creature has Death Touch. So with blue black, their intended archetype they've said is blue black control. I don't know exactly how true or not true that is, but the actual mechanical themes in blue and black, you've got artifacts, which this card alludes to. In black, there is a sacrifice theme as well. I think that's like 2 of the bigger themes for those colors, like sacrificey stuff in black and artifacts in blue. And yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on this card or blue black?
Well, just before you get to that, probably a good idea, like overlapping that artifact theme, we have another one of our new card types.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, you want to talk on that?
Yeah, so the other kind of headliner mechanic, flagship mechanic, you might want to call
Yeah.
it, for the type of card it is spacecraft. So this is also leaning towards slower, and I have included one in this archetype here. There's
Mm-hmm.
only actually 2 of them at common and a bunch more at uncommon and rare. Spacecraft are kind of like the new take on vehicles or battles where you have to like pump creatures into it before it actually does the thing. In this case, we have Pinnacle Killship, so a 7 mana common. It has an enter the battlefield effect of dealing 10 damage to up to 1 creature. And then if you don't do anything else, it just sits there. So
Mm-hmm.
it can just like, it's not doing anything. It's just an artifact on the battlefield. But you can crew it at sorcery speed. And when you crew it, you're bumping that creature's power into it and putting charge counters onto it. And once it has 7 or more charge counters, this thing becomes a 7/7 flying.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about this card specifically on its own. We're not going to go into it now, but notably, these new spacecraft, they do kind of get sprinkled into the archetypes. They are here to support them in a number of ways. And in Blue Black's case, being an artifact is, of course, going to be relevant for the card we're actually talking about, which is Alpharel Dreaming Alkalite.
Yeah, totally. And I think maybe we'll do a bit of a deeper look at spacecraft. Maybe when we talk about red white. I don't know if you had a specific time that you wanted to deep dive on them, but
Yeah, for now, I think what Blue Black just looks like well supported. I gave the same grade for this. I gave a B minus. You gave Alpharel a B, so again, slightly higher than me. I think this looks like pretty good. You can see there's already like more cards here than there was in the blue-white archetype. So I just
yeah.
think there's just more kind of things that are going to go into this rough shell. And if you're talking about the format being about drawing cards and killing things, I mean, blue-black's hard to go wrong if that's going to be the case.
Yep, exactly. Next up, we've got red black. Okay, so red black is like a red black sacrificey artifact-ish deck. And our signpost in common is Interceptor Mechan, which is 2 black red for a 2/2 flying artifact creature. When it enters, return target artifact or creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And it's got a new mechanic, Void, which says at the beginning of your end step, if a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn, or a spell was warped this turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So Void is saying you can either, it's kind of like a twist on Morbid, or a twist on Revolt, sort of like those mechanics if you played with those. One of the kind of easy things that's easy to overlook is that this counts both players, right? So you can trigger Void either by sacrificing a card you control, or killing one of your opponent's creatures, or of course warping a creature also counts. So yeah, this card's pretty strong. Like 4 mana, 2/2 flyer that Gravedig something, buy something back from the yard, and then threatens to get bigger.
Yeah, for this card itself, just before we talk about the actual archetype, we actually flipped grades on this. So you gave this one a B minus. I actually gave it a B.
Yeah.
I do, and that is again just thinking anything with an ETB in this set. I think that's going to be a lot of what it's about, just because it's going to be so hard to keep things on the battlefield between all the spot removal we find at common, and then as we'll see on Thursday, there's a whole bunch of sweepers and wraths in this set.
Yeah,
so
a lot of them.
the Gravedigger is probably going to be a little better than usual. The archetype itself, I found this is the first, I do them in this order, so this is the third one I tackled, and I could have built black-red a whole bunch of different ways. Part of that's due to how they have worded Void. So with Morbid, like Morbid always, when it first came out, it seemed like it was going to be a great ability, and then you play with it and it's like, wow, this is a lot harder to trigger than I thought it was going to be.
Yep.
Void, not only have they made sure that, if you exile the creature, you wouldn't trigger Morbid, but you trigger Void. If you bounce a creature, you wouldn't trigger Morbid, but you'll trigger Void. And then, of course, there's the warping as well, which is the other buyout to trigger Void. So you can trigger Void by sacrificing things, you can trigger it by warping things, you can trigger it by getting into combat, you can trigger it by pointing kill spells at things. So I think for black-red, you can go more like an aggressive beatdowny route. And I tried to do that. At common, there's very few 1, 2, and 3 mana creatures that would make me nervous on the control side of things.
Right.
Like, there's not a lot of high power things. There's not a lot of things that you're like, wow, immediately, or it's going to get out of hand. Most things are pretty small. Some of them are more on the value side. So I do think like this shell specifically is more leaning into the sacrifice side of things. We do have the threaten on the right side here, which is a reward for being in the black-red sacrifice space. And I think that black-red will be an interesting one and one of the better decks just because of the flexibility there on the common level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't see this for blue-black, but just, of course, we'll talk about this when we get into the colors. But I do think that black, I feel is pretty safe to say, is one of the better colors in this set, like common and uncommon wise. So just a little note there.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, moving on to green-red. So green-red has a landfall theme. And to support that, there's these lander tokens. Actually, one thing that we didn't mention with the Void thing is that there is this lander mechanic. I'll show an example here. The Galactic Wayfarer, 3 mana, 3/3, comes in, makes a lander artifact token. The lander tokens are 2 tap sack, search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped. So that's a way to trigger your Void, number one. But of course, it's a way to get additional landfall triggers. So our signpost here, our gold card, is Tanuk, Memorial Ensign. So this is 1 red-green for a 2/4 legendary creature. The landfall ability says when a land enters, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. And if it's the second time this ability has resolved this turn, draw a card.
Yeah, no evolving wilds or like free way to do this.
Yep.
So you really do need to be triggering this with either landers or other like rampant growth style of effects. For that reason, we're both a little lower on Tanuk. You gave Tanuk a C+. I gave him or it, I guess, a C. So a little bit lower. And this was the 4th archetype I tackled. But I actually went back and completely rebuilt this one. So this is actually the 11th one I did.
Okay.
The reason is, when I was putting these green packages together, especially with lander tokens, it seemed to me like a lot of lander decks would be like rampy, building up. There's a lot of support for these like big late game decks. You can splash a bunch, you can do a whole bunch of different things. And if you're making a bunch of landers, that might be the natural way to push things.
Mm-hmm.
Green itself really lends itself nicely to that like kind of splish splashy rampy late game style deck. But I went back and I'm like, all of my green decks kind of look the same. So which one of these can I turn into like a more aggressive leaning archetype?
Yeah.
And I decided red green was probably the best one to do that. So notably, even at the 2-drop slot here, there's only 2 actual 2-drops at common, so not a ton of support. But the creatures are reasonably sized. Those big power creatures will also help you potentially with some of your spacecraft, which is something. Yeah, we'll talk about this more. I've got a whole monologue on spacecraft,
Great.
but I'll save that for maybe red white. But notably, if you I don't know if you have it in screen here, but if you have the uncommon rewards for this, there's a ton of red uncommons that are quite aggressively statted
Yeah.
that if no one else wants to pick up, if you like slide your way into that red aggressive deck, you can maybe build a deck that's got, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 uncommons in it. And some of those will be terrifying for a control deck.
Totally. Yeah, and I think just more credence to the thought of, I think the uncommons are really going to matter in this set. I think there's a few themes actually like that. We'll get to green-white in a minute here. But green-white, like, looks pretty unassuming and pretty not great if you're just looking at the commons. But then if you're like, oh, I got all of the uncommons at the table for this archetype, like, my deck actually looks really good. I think the same thing going on with green-red here. Yeah, so I guess we can move on to what I was just talking about, green-white here. So green-white's got a +1/+1 counter theme. And the uncommon here is Halia, Ascendant Cadet. So this is 2 green-white for a 3/3 legendary creature. When it enters or attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. And it also says whenever one or more creatures you control with a +1/+1 counter on it deals combat damage, draw a card. So this one, a little more suspect of it, I think. Like, a little bit hard to cast, although on a 5-mana card, it's not, the biggest deal to have a double pip in there. But it's a little bit understated. You're getting 4 mana worth of stats for 5. Maybe you can draw a card the turn it comes in. I don't know. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I actually want to touch on something you mentioned in the middle there, which is the pips on this. Because one thing we haven't talked about is the pack breakdown.
Oh, yeah.
For this set. Because this is the first set in a while where we're only going to have 13 card packs. So you will not, like on Arena at least, in paper you'll get a basic in every other pack as your 14th. But there are no basics replaced with duels like there have been for the past, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 sets in a row.
Yep.
You only, and again, no evolving wilds. There's only one fixing land under rare, so it's like a common land that's kind of okay. And so I think that pips in this format are also going to feel a lot more weighty than they normally would.
Yeah, it feels like we're going in naked. Honestly, just the lack of fixing. Like we have, like you said, one land at common, and it's not even like a generically always you want to play it kind of land. There's going to be some decks I think you don't play it. We'll talk about when we get to it. But yeah, I think just adjust for those who have played the last 6 months of sets, even more than that, where fixing was pretty abundant. You could splash pretty easily. I don't think that is necessarily going to be the case here. So just watch out for that.
Yeah, so we do have, landers, which are sprinkled across many, if not all color. Like, I don't, white not might have any, but I think maybe every other color does.
Every color does, even white. White gets a few.
Okay, so yeah, every color has some landers, so those are kind of your ways to fix. But those are so slow. Like, drawing a late game rampant growth that you need to cast to get your tapped version of that land is molasses slow. So if you're playing green white, probably beatdown if you're like loading up counters on creatures, you need this Halia to come down on turn 5 to increase your chances of drawing a card. I gave it a grade that I think actually might be too high.
Oh wow. Okay.
Which is actually the same as what you did, which is C-. I could see this being like a total flop.
I could too. Yeah, I could too. I think there's a few other cards that come to mind. I can't think of them off the top of my head, but when I was grading this set, I was like, there's a few like on-hit triggers if you satisfy some requirements, and it's kind of come down to deck building. I think in a lot of cases where if you've got some evasive things, some things with trample, when this enters, it functionally says draw a card. It's going to be pretty good. But I think there's going to be a lot of decks too where it's just like, hey, I got my signpost, but it's not actually doing that much. So we'll see. Definitely the least impressive of the bunch for us right now.
And there's only one of them, so like it kind of needs to hit. It's not like in some other formats where okay, one of the signposts is so-so, but the other one's amazing, so it
Yeah,
kind of makes up
totally.
for it.
Yeah, I think.
So I actually found these white archetypes the hardest to build, just because white it does have some warp stuff that's kind of simulating card advantage, but it's not great at drawing cards. The removal spells almost all hit like tapped creatures,
Mm-hmm.
and then the main creatures are more aggressive. So this is actually, I don't know if you caught Samp's recent podcast. Shout out to Samp for putting out great content. But he mentioned this kind of thing where there's a bit of a divide where not only are white's four archetypes all doing quite different things from each other, they're also mostly supposed to be aggressive based on the signpost, and the support at common isn't necessarily there. So pretty skeptical of green white, especially with all the removal floating around. Like loading up counters onto one thing is good if they don't have removal, but that's almost never going to be the case. So not so sure where this is going to end up either.
Yeah, and then moving on to black white, which might be less supported than green white even. So I mean, black white's got this go wide theme, but not a lot of ways to go wide. Like the signpost here, Sir Vondam the Lucent, is a pretty decent card. 2 white, black, black, legendary creature 4/4, lifelink death touch. When it enters or attacks other creatures you control, get +1/+0 and gain death touch until end of turn. So like, if you've got a few token makers in there, which there are a few, mind you, that's a pretty good effect. Even without token makers, this is an okay effect. But this theme, black white's go wide, like I think you should take that very much with a grain of salt.
Yeah, going wide is like they released the archetype descriptions, and that was black white's was go wide, and there's no black common that makes 2 bodies. There's one white common that makes multiple bodies, and the set's full of wrath. So
Mm-hmm.
like so many reasons why you don't want to do this. I still like this signpost, and I do think if you just put like good, if you're supposed to be in white and black, and again you're getting those uncommons passed to you, it's probably still going to be a deck. I maybe believe in this more than the couple of Naya decks we just saw, just because, or I guess the green white one specifically. But yeah, Vondam, I think you're gonna have to just assume that it's just a couple of cards it's affecting, and not gonna be like a game winning. Oh, I have 5 creatures out. I'm just gonna kill you with this when it comes down type of thing.
Yeah, no, I very much agree with that. We're gonna move
The
on. Oh yeah,
grade
sorry, go.
you
Yeah,
gave
go ahead. We didn't give a grade. I forgot. Yeah, let's give it a grade.
Yeah, so I actually bumped this one up last second just because I do like the Death Touch Lifelink and ETB for a 5-drop is still got me slightly optimistic. I gave it a C plus. You gave it a C.
Yeah, totally. Somewhere in that range. Green black up next. So green black is allegedly a graveyard deck, and there's some stuff in there that cares about the graveyard, but I think less so than, if we're gonna make the comparison to like Aether Drift, which had a really good graveyard deck, or Final Fantasy had a pretty good black-green graveyard theme. A little bit later here, once again. The signpost, pretty nice one though. Seedship Broodtender. This is black-green for a 2/3. Uncommon, not a rare, like a lot of these signposts are. This says, when it enters, you mill 3 cards. Then you can pay 3 black-green, sack this creature, return target creature or spacecraft from your graveyard to the battlefield, activate only as a sorcery. So 2-mana 2/3 enables itself kind of, and is a reanimation spell. Like, this is a nice card. There's the one from Aether Drift that was an artifact that kind of was a similar thing, right? It was like you surveil one on your upkeep and you reanimate for 4. That card turned out to be pretty darn good, and yeah, I think this one's going to be pretty good as well.
Yeah, Broodheart Engine was it? It was
yes,
solid
that's the one.
card.
Broodheart Engine.
Sorry, my archetype's being slow to pull up here. I'll go to the grades first. So for the Broodtender, we both gave it a B. Again, just like very solid looking card. But once again, the support is really just not there. Like there's no other green and black commons that mill you. So we don't get the green card that mills a bunch and returns a land like we often do. We don't get a black like mill a bunch of cards and then bring something back to your hand type of thing that we usually do. And there's only, even at uncommon, there's only a couple of cards that actually mill you. So another case where the archetype that was advertised by Wizards is not something I would trust whatsoever. Just play good cards in this deck, play some good creatures, play some good removal, and then this uncommon will still be, a second copy of whatever your best card is. and they'll still perform fairly well.
Yeah, exactly. I was just gonna say something very similar, where it's like, yeah, sure, self mill is great when you got these reanimation effects, but the other side of things you need when you're doing this kind of thing is good creatures. If you got good creatures, this card's gonna be pretty solid. Next up, we've got blue green. So blue green is ramping, very typical blue green affair, and it's got the. I'm gonna read the entire format as Biome Chan Engineer. I'm not gonna read it that way. It's really Biomechan Engineer, but this is blue green for a 2/2 uncommon. Again, not legendary. When it enters, you make a lander token, and you can pay 8 mana, 8 colorless or 8 generic. Draw 2 cards and make a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token. This card is really, really strong.
Yeah, this thing's incredibly good. Like,
Yeah.
if they kill it right away, you're happy. If they don't kill it right away, you're happy. Like, this is probably my vote for the best Signpost Uncommon, just because it's incredibly statted. I gave it a B plus. You went into the A minus range, which I totally respect. This card's going to be the real deal.
Yes, absolutely. And this is one of the earlier cards we saw previewed. I posted it a few places, and some people were like, wow, that activated ability seems pretty sweet. Will we be able to activate an 8-mana ability? I mean, number one, the card helps you get there on its own, right? Just that it basically ramps you, draws you a land. But also, yeah, I think definitely we're in 8 mana is fair game territory in this set.
Yeah, and so I did build this archetype just with the 2 colors, but I do think, when you're leaning into the green side of these archetypes, you can certainly splash a bit with creating landers, and of course this is one of the ways to spot you one of those. So I wouldn't be surprised if people are jamming multiple 6, 7, and 8 drops in their green decks and kind of hamming it up. So I think that, sometimes blue-green kind of suffers because even though it's rampy, there's not a lot of reward for ramping and not a lot of removal. And I think this archetype fixes both of those holes and will still be pretty good.
Yeah, totally. And, we're not going to go over all of them, but I'll pull some aside here. But there are some pretty good expensive things to ramp into, like at below rare level, right, at uncommon level. So, yeah, I think that your payoffs, you're going to see them here and there. Next up, we've got red-blue. So this is red-blue artifact aggro. And the signpost is Memnon? It's a lot of M's. I'll throw Exiles. This is 1 blue-red for a 1/3 legendary creature. It's got flying, and it says whenever an artifact you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature.
So this is actually a snowball potential, right? This is
Yes.
one where it's like, you need to kill this right away or it's going to be a big problem.
Yeah, we had this card in, what was it, LCI, the Captain Storm. It was a 2-mana 2/2, though, instead of a 3-mana 1/3 flyer, and that card was really, really good.
Yeah, and the support here is similar. So there's a ton of artifacts in blue-red. I think you can really lean into it. It does still just die to removal. Like, if, even if you play it and play something right away, they can respond to that entering ability and not get any value off of this. So neither of us put it in the B range. We both gave it a C+. But the archetype here, it's jam-packed with artifacts. Even the removal spell that I have here, 4-drop, makes an artifact as well. So tons of support for this. And if you get multiple of these, they are legendary, but you can really run some people over with some quick starts.
Yeah, for sure. Like, we've been kind of saying some of these archetypes are maybe slightly unsupported. There are a lot of artifacts. Like, so if you see, like, do a thing when you have an artifact, like, that's a card that's probably going to work in this set. And then the last one here is red-white. So red-white's thing is apparently just spacecrafts. Like, it just wants spacecrafts, cares about having tapped creatures, so you can, kind of have a backwards compatible thing where it's like, oh, I want you to tap my creatures so I can turn on my spacecrafts, but also, like, this creature wants to be tapped, so I want spacecrafts in my deck. So it's kind of like, they kind of feed into each other there. The signpost is Sammy Ship's Engineer, which is a 2 red-white 2/4 legendary creature. At the beginning of your end step, if you control 2 or more tapped creatures, you create a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token.
Yeah, so this, I mean, we usually slow down and kind of speed through the archetypes and do them faster and faster, but this is one that probably is worth some talking about because I find red-white super interesting in this set. The grade first, both of us gave Sammy a C, which is kind of reflective of the fact that for 4 mana, no ETB, no protection, you are running into some risks there. It does have a pseudo ETB where you can trigger it the turn it comes down. Notably, I think this might be an interesting card to splash off of, a green card we're going to talk about later, Gene Pollinator.
Mm.
There are a number of ways to tap your things outside of combat. Like normally with tap creatures, it would be okay, I'm attacking with combat, and then post combat, I'm triggering my tapped stuff. Kind of like you had like survivors in Duskmourn, where there was some ways to do that outside of combat, but the main way was in combat
Attack.
and getting
Yeah.
your creatures involved. This one is almost the opposite, where I think combat is going to be the second most likely way of triggering all your stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. And by the way, I actually misread this slightly. It makes a tapped 2/2 when it
Yes.
triggers. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't catch that, but I'm
Yeah,
glad
yeah.
you did, or maybe it's that. But
Yeah, that was chat. So thank you, chat. Which makes
yeah,
this definitely notably worse. So I think let's just take a second and talk about spacecraft because it's a little bit weird. It's a little bit strange to grok. Like, I've seen a lot of people say like these are terrible. Why am I ever gonna put these in my deck? Some people saying these seem really good. Yeah, there's a wide range of opinions here. And I guess the first place I want to start is what I was just alluding to with Sammy, where you don't want to just look at these spacecrafts as okay, like let's take that Pinnacle kill ship for example. The 7 mana comes in, deals 10 to something, 7 counters, it becomes a 7/7 flyer. You don't want to just think of it as like, okay, it's a 7 mana removal spell that I can eventually turn to a flyer. You also kind of want to think, what else does it do? Well, it's an artifact for the blue artifact things. And it can help you tap your creatures that want to be tapped. There's a lot of them for in red and white. So it's both a payoff and an enabler in some ways. I kind of think of it like Bargain from Wilds of Eldraine in that way, where like there were some things you wanted to sack to bargain. If this is a reference that you don't know that set, don't worry about it. But for the folks that did play that set, they'll know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I think just when you're evaluating these, when you're looking at these, think of them in the whole context of the set. That's kind of the first thing I would put out there. Yeah. What about you actually, Mark? What's your initial like? Do you think spacecrafts are going to be good? How many are we going to be playing? Like, what's your take there?
all right, so strap down and get comfy because I want to talk about these for a little while.
Absolutely.
Do one of my
Yeah.
my old school monologues. So it was kind of interesting because the preview section for this set we didn't get a lot of commons. Like we actually had 50 commons remaining as late as Friday, where we still didn't know 50 commons in the set on the last day of spoilers.
Yep.
And so as these were coming out, the community consensus was kind of that these are like a meme because so often your like novice limited player, they just look at the upside, like what is the best possible case scenario, and then your more seasoned veteran limited player is like no, we got to consider what's the average case, and they're much more skeptical of cards.
Right.
So people were kind of dubious about spacecraft because you spend a lot of mana initially on them. Like most of them are quite expensive. They don't have huge ETBs for most of them. Some of them don't even have any ETBs. So in some cases, you're tapping a bunch of mana to do nothing to impact the board.
Mm-hmm.
And then it asks you to tap all of your creatures, or at least a good chunk of your creatures, for multiple turns. And in an era where we've been used to seeing games snowball very quickly, you can't spend a bunch of mana to do nothing and then tap all your blockers. Like you're just asking to die and get run over.
Yeah, totally.
So people have been comparing these to either vehicles because you crew them tapping your creatures to power, or they've been comparing them to battles because you kind of send that creature's power at your battle and you flip them that way. But I actually think these are quite unique because battles punish the aggro player because if you're able to push damage, you wanted to push it face.
Mm-hmm.
But this one, if you don't have a good attack, you can just send your stationing creatures towards the vehicle, and then control decks are using these as a way to kind of convert life into board presence. So for aggro decks, I actually think these are much more free to station because you don't really care about tapping your blockers. It just incentivizes your opponent to attack you, and then you can push a whole bunch of damage. So
right.
If you're in like the red-white more aggressive space, you can play your creatures, you can crew your station, your spacecraft, And then you should say, yeah, hey, I'm tapped out. I've got no blockers. What are you going to do? Are you going to attack me? If you leave your creatures back, I'm just going to continue to station them and build up my board. Because the other thing that's different from vehicles never increased your number of attackers.
Mm,
Because you always need to spend a creature to turn your vehicle into a body. So you net end up with the same number of board presence attackers.
absolutely.
This is actually a way for you to increase your board presence and build up a wider board while kind of, again, like incentivizing your opponent to attack you. The other thing that's different about this is with vehicles, if you play the vehicle and then crew it right away, it does nothing because it has summoning sickness. And with a battle, if you play the battle and then play the creature can't immediately attack the battle because it doesn't have haste.
Mm-hmm.
Spaceship don't care what order you play like the spaceship or the
Yeah.
creature in,
Yeah.
because no matter what, you can immediately crew your spaceship or station your spaceship with your creatures and dump that power into there. So if we are in an era where creatures are just going to get killed on site with removal spell, this is almost like including an extra ETB for your creature, where you're like, hey, this creature, my 4/4 creature here, sure, maybe it didn't get to block, but it was just going to die anyways. But I got to dump that 4 power into my station for my spacecraft.
Yeah.
And now it has, in a sense, provided value to me the turn I played it to increase my board presence for later on. So I'm actually reasonably optimistic for spacecraft. I think they're actually going to play out a lot better than people anticipate. Notably, though, for red-white, you need spacecraft to be not that high picks because there's only 2 commons in the set and 10 uncommons and a few rares. And you probably need like 4-ish spacecraft in your red-white deck
Mm-hmm.
to reliably have a way to tap your creatures and get that value out of things. But you also don't want to draw too many of them early because if your hand's just full of spacecraft, they're not going to be
Yeah.
able to
They don't
station
do
each other.
anything. Yeah.
So really interesting spot. Like I spent a long time talking about this, but this archetype, I do think there's enough here. A lot of the creatures, almost all of them only require 2 tapped things. So it's like itself plus 1 other thing. And between spacecraft and ways of like self-tapping and getting into combat, I'm optimistic that there will be like a reasonably successful red-white deck if people don't just be like, oh, new mechanic spacecraft, I'm going to take every single one I see and leave the red-white deck with none of them available at the table.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a few folks in my Discord that have just, done online play with this set, just like, on Cockatrice or whatever draft simulator that people play. And a lot of people said their initial impression was, yeah, they actually, these spacecrafts turn on easier than you might expect. You don't really feel like, oh, it's this gigantic cost to tap my creatures. You actually like want to do it a lot of the time. So yeah, I mean, great thoughts. Like, I love me a good Marc monologue. I think that basically brings us to the ends of the archetypes. Anything that you want to cover before we move on to the rest of the cards in the set?
No, we one of the takeaways from Final Fantasy was that we thought there was a pretty good balance across archetypes here. It doesn't seem to be the case at common for these.
Yeah.
So we're going to cover the commons and uncommons today. We'll kind of touch on trends when we get there and point out whether they might fit into a certain archetype. But I do feel like there's kind of some winners and losers from the early archetype analysis, at least.
Yeah, I agree with that.